Okay, so we talk about the Book of Numbers, and just sort of a brief overview of the five books, which depending on how brief you want to be. If you want to be really brief, if you want every book in one sentence, you could really think about it. One way to think about it, as I mentioned last week, I believe that the first book is the book of creation, okay, but the forming of the Jewish family, right? So in other words, you talk about creation, you talk about the flood, but the idea is how Abraham was chosen, how the Jewish family, how the patriarchs and matriarchs were chosen. So it's a story of family. That's the first book. Second book is a story about the people, the nation. We go to Egypt, and Egypt would become a nation. The exodus of Egypt, of course, we get the Torah. At Sinai, we become a nation, depending on how you count it. In other words, at birth, we're sort of a birth of our nation is that in Egypt at the moment of the Exodus, it's like leaving the womb, and then we come and become a full-fledged people at Sinai. And then we build the tabernacle. But in other words, if book one is family, book two is nation. Book five we'll put aside a second because book five is repetition, so we don't have to worry about that. So once you have a nation, what are the big ideas you have to worry about? So in some ways it's book three and book four. And in some ways, book three is how you are in your home, meaning in your own environment, in a state of holiness. So let's say in the land of Israel, literally, or your own environment in your home, in the space that you create for yourself in the inside. And that's really the opening of the third book. God refers to Moshe, calls Moshe Be'ohel Moed, in the tent of meeting. In other words, this is a holy space. And it's all about laws. Well, not all about, but a good part of the book is about holiness and offerings. These are things that we do in a specific in our own holy environment. Now, that holy environment spreads, as we mentioned in the past weeks. It's not only in the temple, it's also in the land of Israel. We talked about the sabbatical, and it's not only for specific people, but it's for everybody. And it's not only, and there's also times of holiness like holidays. But in general, you're going to say the third book is how to be a Jew, how to live and be close to God when you are in your natural environment. Okay, that's book three. What is book four? Book four is in the wilderness. What happens when you're traveling? Now, in the wilderness, traveling, either literally or figuratively, but traveling means you're not in a controlled environment and you're not in a space that is your natural space. So we understand that there are going to be certain challenges and difficulties and opportunities as well that occur specifically in the desert. But really, you can divide your entire life into, into book three and book four. Am I in a tent of meeting? Am I in my native space? Am I in a place of holiness? Or am I in the desert, in the wilderness, in a challenging place where I have to really make an effort to even survive spiritually and make it through this challenging environment? And like I said, it's not just survival, it's also thriving, right? We grow there in these 38 years. But the point here is that sort of encompasses all of a person's life. If you want to talk about Jewish history, most of Jewish history, we were in the desert, we weren't in the tent of meeting. Most of Jewish history, we were out of Israel, not in Israel. So in other words, just to review quickly, book one, family, book two, nation, book three, in the state of holiness in your native place, in the tent of meeting, in your house. Book four is on the road. And on the road has all kinds of challenges and all kinds of opportunities. So that's introduction to the introduction. Now we could start with the parsha in a nutshell. I hope you like numbers because there's a lot of numbers in the book of Numbers, especially in the parsha, the first parsha of the book of Numbers. There are plenty of numbers. So I hope you like it. Just to give you sort of a little introduction, what's happening here, there's going to be a census, which is not the first time there's a census in the Torah. So we have a census, but in addition to the census, now the Torah also explains how the Jewish people traveled through the desert and how this time we're counting each tribe, not just the collective census of all the Jewish people, each tribe. And then we talk about how the tribes traveled through the desert, camping around the tabernacle, the Mishkan. So you have the Mishkan in the center, the temple in the center, and then you have four camps of three tribes each on the four corners of the temple. So first we talk about each tribe, then we talk about each camp, which is three tribes, and then we give the total. So there's a lot of times that we not count, and then there's this whole thing about not counting the Levites, and then we do count the Levites, a different counting. So there's a lot about the Levites, and then there's the firstborn. We count the Levites and we count the firstborn, and we have to get them to match up. So there's a lot of counting here. So we'll jump right in and think about the counting. Here we go. Book name of the parsha is Bamidbar, means in the desert, and it is found in Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. Very easy to find. Once you know you're in the fourth book, 1:1. Can't be that hard. Okay, it's easy. In the Sinai desert, God says to conduct a census of the 12 tribes of Israel. Moses counts 550,000 men of draftable age, 20 to 60 years. The tribe of Levi, numbering 22,300 males, age 1 month and older, is counted separately. There's a specific census, specific commandment. Do not count the Levites with the rest of the Jewish people. Count them separately. All the Jewish people are counted from 20 to 60, age 20 years old to 60 years old. Levites, 30 days old. Okay, so 30 days old and older. The Levites are to serve in the sanctuary. They replaced the firstborn whose numbers they approximated, since they were disqualified when they participated in the worshiping of the golden calf. In other words, first it was supposed to be who was supposed to perform the service in the temple. It was supposed to be the Bechor, the firstborn of every family, because when it came to the sin of the golden calf, the firstborn also participated in the sin. Only the tribe of Levi did not. So now the holiness of the firstborn is transferred from the firstborn to the Levites. Now, so we count how many Levites there are, how many firstborn there are, and we sort of make a switch. Now the problem is the 273 firstborn who lacked a Levite to replace them had to pay a 5 shekel ransom to redeem themselves. Right? So there were more Levites than firstborn, 273. Those 273 people, now the holiness they have to sort of buy back their right. They're no longer holy. They pay 5 coins and they get their right to be a private citizens back. If it reminds you of the redemption of the firstborn, that's essentially what's happening is when you have a firstborn to an Israelite woman and an Israelite man, in other words, not a priest and not a Levite, the firstborn is holy. If you want to take your firstborn home, you can take him home. But when the child is 30 days old, if you want him to, you have to redeem the holiness, because really, essentially, this child belongs to God. If you want to sort of buy him back, you have to pay 5 coins to the priest. So this is a similar ceremony. We could talk about that, God willing. When the people broke camp, when they would travel, so they're not traveling yet. We're going to talk about the Jewish people. By the way, we are the Jewish people right now. They're actually still at Sinai. It's almost a year after they received the Torah, but they're still at Sinai. They're only going to leave from Sinai in 2 weeks from now, in 2 portions. But now we're telling you how they would travel through the desert. So in other words, before you can figure out to travel, you first have to make a census, figure out how many people do we have, who's going to stand where, who's going to travel where, then we could start traveling, okay? So when the people broke camp, the three Levite clans dismantled and transported the sanctuary and assembled it at the center of the next encampment. So again, what the Levites would also, we have a census for the Levites, we have a census of each family of the Levites. There are 3 families, and each family had a specific job to do in the dismantling and transportation of the temple when they traveled through the desert. They then erected their own tents around it. The Kohathites, who carried the sanctuary's vessels, the ark, menorah, etc., in their specially designated coverings on their shoulders, camped to its south. The Gershonites in charge of the tapestries and roof coverings to its west, and the families of Merari who transported its wall panels and its pillars to its north. Before the sanctuary's entranceway in the east were the tents of Moses, Aaron, and the Aaron's sons. In other words, once they settled, you had the temple in the center, the 3 families of Levites surrounding it from 3 directions, and in the east, in the front, was Moses, Aaron, and Moses' sons, and they were in the east. So you have one ring around the temple is Levites. Then we continue and talk about the rest of the Jewish people. Beyond the Levite circles, the 12 tribes camped in 4 groups, 4 groups of 3 tribes, 3 tribes each. To the east were Judah, 74,600, Yissachar, 5,400 and 400, Zebulun, 57,400. To the south is Reuven, Shimon, and Gad. To the west, Ephraim, Menashe, and Benjamin. And to the north, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. This formation was kept Also, while traveling, each tribe had its own nasi, prince or leader, and its own flag with its tribal color and emblem. So that is, ladies and gentlemen, the story of how they traveled, the census of the Israelites, the census of the Levites, separate census, then a specific census within the families of the Levites, and then we have the camps, how the camps traveled, and the number, the total of each camp, and then ultimately the total of all the Jewish people. So that's a lot of numbers. If you're still here and you're still paying attention, then that's pretty amazing. Okay, so then now we can get into the details here. Torah reading. Okay, let's talk about the Torah. The Torah is interested in census. It's not the only time. It happens a lot. Let's talk about a census for a minute, and specifically what's unique about this census. So this is interesting. So I'm just going to read the first verse of the Torah, the first verse of the fourth book of the parsha, as well as the Rashi, and we'll see what we make of this. So Bamidbar Numbers chapter 1. God spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month of the second year after their exodus from Egypt, saying. So, in other words, we're talking about the first of ER. The first of ER is more than a year after the original Exodus, right? The Exodus was on Passover, which we know is the 15th of Nisan, 15th of month one. And now the commandment is on the first of month two, 1 year later. So we have 1 year after the Exodus. Like I said, they've been at Sinai for almost a year, but they're 1 year after the Exodus. 1 year and 15 days essentially after the Exodus. And then what does God say? God says, count the people, etc. So let's read Rashi. God spoke in the Sinai desert on the first day of the second month. Because the Israelites are so dear to God, he counts them at every point. When they left Egypt, he counted them. And when some of them fell during the incident of the golden calf, he counted them to know how many remained. And now, once he came to rest his presence among them, he counted them on the first of Nisan. The tabernacle was erected, and he counted them. I'm sorry. On the first of Nisan, the tabernacle was erected, and on the first of Iyar, he counted them. What is Rashi saying? Rashi is saying we have three censuses, is that a word? Censuses in the plural, within a little bit more than a year, within a year and 2 weeks. And that's crazy, right? In America, you do a census once in 10 years. And then you could start fighting about gerrymandering and how many seats in every House of Congress, in every congressional district. But that's another story. But the bottom line is a census once in 10 years makes sense. Here we have three censuses in 1 month. I'm sorry, in 1 year and 2 weeks. What happened? Why are we obsessing? Why are we counting all the time? That's question number one. Another problem is, what's the point of a census? In other words, the census is you want to know how many people you have. But ultimately, first of all, God knows how many people there are. So you say, okay, you have to know how to organize the people. Okay, so Moshe will figure out how to organize the people. Moshe will make a census, a technical census to figure out who to put where and who should sit where. So we'll divide the seats and tell everyone where to go. But if God is commanding, oh, you have to take a census, it means that this census has spiritual significance. Say, what's the spiritual significance of a census? What's wrong with the census? What's necessary about a census? So these are the questions that Rashi is addressing. What does Rashi answer? Rashi says, what do you count? You count what you love. So mitoch basan, because of the Israelites are dear to God. Not a great translation. Chipa is love. Because the Jewish people, because God loves the Israelites, He counts them at every point. If you're obsessed with something, you keep counting it. You know how many there are. Doesn't matter. You're counting it. The purpose of counting is not knowledge of how many you have, but the purpose of counting is to express your love. If you really love it, you're going to keep counting it. And therefore, Rashi uses an expression which we can talk about, that Rebbe talks about this. Maybe we'll talk about it on Friday. He counts them. He counts them. Kol shah. Kol shah is every hour. Does it count them every hour? Maybe not, but we'll talk about what that word means. Here they translate, they soften it. They translate at every point, meaning anytime there's something dramatic happens. They left Egypt, census. Some sin, they sin with the golden calf. Some died, another census. God wants to dwell amongst the people. Okay, another census. So, so that expresses love. So that is that's the starting point. You can't talk about census without talking about addressing love. By the way, somebody pointed out, I forgot who, that Rashi is not just a commentator. Rashi is also expressing values. That's another whole story. I could do a class about Rashi in general. But what's interesting about Rashi, someone pointed out, again, I don't even remember who, that each at the beginning of every book, Rashi inserts an explanation that expresses God's love for the Jewish people. If you track each one of the 5 books, and this is an example, right? The first Rashi, what does Rashi say? Because God loves the people, he counts them constantly. And every book, there's something about love for the people. Even book 5, which starts with rebuke. Moshe rebukes the Jewish people. Rashi says, it's concealed rebuke because Moses is honoring the people, even when it's rebuke. So it's a beautiful thing. How do you look at the Torah? What's the purpose of the Torah? How do you look at another Jew? Rashi says the first thing is understand that the Torah is God's coming to you and telling you what to do. So you can say, it's so demanding. That's the backdrop of everything is the love of God for the people. So that's one point. Okay, let's talk about a census, and it's specifically important because of this census. Because it's true about every census, but it's specifically important about this census, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So a census has 2 things. The problem, on one hand, when you say census, you say, what are you highlighting? What are you counting? On one hand, you're counting. How do I say this nicely? Because for the Jewish people, we have this. If you're just a number, right? So you could say, I'm just a number. I don't really matter. On the other hand, when you're counted, in a way, what it's telling you is that you are just as valuable as everybody else. Moses is not more valuable than you. So in other words, what are we counting? We're counting the common denominator. We're counting what we all have in common. Now, people think of common as the lowest common denominator, but we're talking about the deepest common denominator. In other words, what do we all have in common? We all have the soul. We all have a part of God. When you get to the essence, we're all the same. So if we're counting who would be the best soldier, or we're counting who would be the best Jew, or who would be the best scholar, there may be differences. Who gives the most charity, there may be differences. But the idea of counting in a way is an equalizer, is basically saying that everybody is the same. Everybody has the same core and the same essence. And at the essence, you're just as valuable as everybody else, no more and less than the person sitting next to you. So that expresses the essential character of every person. So that's a very important aspect here. The problem with that aspect is that what about my own individuality? Yes, I'm no more or no less than the other person. We're all created in the image of God. We each have a soul. We're each unique. Okay. But what about my individuality? What about the fact that I am unique and I have a purpose and I have a mission that may be different than yours? So that is also true. And it's true in this census specifically because we preserve the number of each tribe, right? We're counting them by the tribe. If you look at the opening statement of the Parsha, right? Opening statement of the opening commandment, Suet Rosh, verse 2, take a census of the entire community of the Israelites by families, by their paternal houses, by the number of their names, a head count of every male. But it's clear, first of all, we have the people who helped Moses take the census were the leaders of the tribes. That's verse 4. And there must be one man with you from each tribe, the one who is head of his paternal house. In other words, the leaders of each tribe participated in the census. But it's very clear that when they started the census, what they did right away is they counted families. They counted tribes. What does tribe highlight? Tribe highlights the fact that we are different. What does the total number highlight? That we're the same. So are we different or are we the same? The answer is both. On one hand, we have something in common. That's our essence, that's our core. At the core, we're all the same. On the other hand, we have specific individuality, which is critical, and nobody else can replace you because you are indispensable, because you are unique. And that's represented by the fact that we actually do not count. We only get the total once we put together all the subtotals, and that's how we get the total. In other words, we're highlighting differences. So both of these points are true. Both of these are critical to understand our place within the collective Jewish people and the collective Jewish mission. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I was wondering, what is the difference between this census and the ones that we had to count shekels, kind of equalizing? Are we on a different level now? So we at least
Yes.
name the head of the tribes. We cannot possibly name everybody.
So,
But head of
so
the
I think the difference would be that those census, the earlier census, it was just give me a total of everybody. We're looking for what all the Jewish people have in common. And that's important because what that shows you is that what do we all have in common? Like I said, what we all have in common is the deepest common denominator. We all have the soul. And in that sense, we're just as important to as each other. So that's one very important aspect to know, that Moses is no more important than you. But the shortcoming of that feeling is, what about my individuality? And now we have this census that says you're your own tribe and you're part of a people. And you have your own flag and you have your own camp, but you're part of something larger. Now, if it's true about the tribes, it's also true about the families, and it goes down the units all the way to the individual. But that's the same concept. The earlier census doesn't give room for highlighting the importance of every individual. In other words, it's important. You're a number, you're important just as anybody else, but it doesn't highlight your unique contribution or your unique aspect. You're saying you're one, Moses is one, we're all one. Wonderful. But what about how I'm different than Moses? How I can do something that the other person cannot do? My unique contribution. That is the thing that appears in this census. And again, we don't lose the collective. Ultimately, we put all the subtotals together and get the total, right? But both of these concepts are true, and they're both simultaneous.
But it's also in connection with the tribe. It's not individual. It's connected.
Yeah, but once you say there are differences between people, then there's also individuals with. Then you can break it down further. The question is essentially: are we all one or are we all different? Once there are differences, then we understand we're all one tribe. But within the tribe, there's the tribe is more of a general difference. There are 12 differences. But once you could see shades, then you can break up each tribe into individuals. That's my point. The point is usually a census ignores. We have 350 million Americans. That's the number that matters. Doesn't matter what specific characteristics of each one, right? Usually when you have the total is what matters. The individual doesn't matter. Once you say, oh, no, we need to figure out how many people are east, how many north, how many south, how many tribe, each person, each tribe. Okay, so now you're saying that the individual components are not a contradiction to the overarching whole. In other words, you could be part of a whole and yet you retain your own individuality. Once you have that model, you could break it down now to 620, whatever it was, 650,220, whatever the number was, right? Once it's true, once the concept is true, then it's true for every individual as well. Okay, now here comes something very interesting, sort of to balance these 2 points. How come we didn't hear about the census earlier? Or how come we didn't talk about how the tribe should camp earlier? Before they built the temple. What happened? They all lived all together? I'm sure that now we say a temple in the center, everybody around. Okay. But what happened before then? Where did they live? Did they all mix? What happened? What happened for that entire year? And from when they left Egypt until the first of Nisan. Well, now with the first of Iyar. So what happened for that entire year? How did they travel? Why wouldn't the Torah tell us how they should travel to Sinai? And while they're at Sinai, how should they camp at Sinai? Quiet. We don't hear anything. Only now, A month after we built the temple first of Nisan of year two. And now the census is a month later. All of a sudden now we say, this is exactly how you're going to camp, but this is how you're going to travel. The simple answer is because now we have to travel, we have to organize. But there has to be more because it's also how you camp. So it's not just how you travel, it's also how you camp. So how come he didn't tell us how to camp earlier? In other words, essentially what I'm asking is how come the previous census didn't highlight the different tribes as well and put them in different places? So one way to think about it is like this. The only time you could highlight that every tribe is unique, that Judah has his own way of living and Shimon has his own living, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you highlight the differences, you're going to undermine the collective, that we're all part of one whole. So what does God do? God waits until we have a central point. We have an anchor. We have a temple. Once we're all around the temple, now we could say, I'm different than you. I'm on the south side. You're on the north side. Maybe Moses on the east side. But we have something binding us. We have an anchor. Once you have an anchor and saying we're all connected to the temple, we're all connected to God, now we could highlight that I'm different than you. But before we had that temple, if everybody literally had each tribe had a different flag and running in a different direction with a different calling, then you would say, what do these flags have in common? They're tribes, but they have nothing in common. So we're not going to highlight, we're not going to play up the differences between the tribes before we have the temple which anchors them. And that's why first we build the temple. Like Rashi says, first of Nisan, they inaugurated the temple. 1 month later, first of Iyar, they could be counted. Because once they live together and they have this anchor of the unity that we all have in common, now you could highlight the differences. So this is how the more anchored you are, the more you can run off, right? The more you can highlight the individuality because we understand that there's something in our core, in our center, and that is the Torah, that is the Torah and the temple, which is the house for the Torah. And now I could go, each person brings that into their own life, but there's a core, there's a center, there's the temple in the middle that binds them. So that is something about the census and why the census happens exactly now. Another beautiful teaching that I say almost every year, I think, because I think it's really beautiful, is from the Kli Yakar. The Kli Yakar, 17th century sage, commentator, he says something very interesting. In light of what we said earlier, I'm just taking this sort of a step further. There are different values, and each tribe, or each three tribes, if you want to generalize, each three tribes, they excel in something different, something unique. And he explains how how he's going to put down 4 categories, and he explains how the tribes fit into one of these 4 categories. How each 3 tribes are part of each one of these categories. He's the earliest one who did this, so I'm going to give him the credit. But other people, the modern people, contemporary people, are trying to give different qualities. But the point is going to stay the same. So, for example, there's wisdom. He says wisdom is first. Judah's camp is wisdom. Wisdom is first. But what are human qualities? So he says there's wisdom, there's good character, midot, good character. There is wealth, and there's physical strength. Who doesn't want that? We want to be wise, we want to have good character, we want to have means to live, and we want to have health to enjoy the blessings we have. These are 4 values. Now, you can't be good at everything, right? If you spend too much time in the gym, you're not going to have time to study Torah, to study too much. If you study too much, you're not going to have time for business, right? So ultimately, different people, even though we each want a little bit of everything, different people excel in different areas. Okay. Now, remember, this creates another problem, which is the tension in my life. I have competing values. Now, I have many more things I have to worry about. But what we're going to say about these 4 is true about all the other things that I have to do in my life. I have to pay the electric bill. I have to move my car if I live in Brooklyn, where I'm from. I have to go to the grocery store. I got a lot of things to do that are competing for my attention. I have to be a good spouse. I have to be a good parent. I have to be a good whatever it is. There's so many things pulling you in all different directions, and it can create chaos, which is what the wilderness is, absolute chaos. Okay, so what are we saying? But so instead of talking about all the details, let's talk about these 4. So I got 4 things. Now we ask you a question: which one of these are more valuable? is there one of these that are more valuable? And so this is a trick question. Is wisdom more valuable than money? Is money more valuable than health? Which one is more physical? I don't want to say health, physical strength. So on one hand, what's funny here is like this. On one hand, we're going to say there is a hierarchy of values, there is a hierarchy of what is greater. And that's why Torah is going to list four camps and say the first is the camp of Judah. That's the first. Then there's camp two. Then there's camp three. Then there's camp four. So there is linear. There is one is higher than the next. That's on one hand. On the other hand, we say they're all around the temple. The temple is the center. Now, if you say they're all around the temple, what you're really saying is that none of them is closer to the temple than the other one. So is wisdom closer to the temple than monetary than wealth? No. I mean, the Torah lists it. When Torah lists it, starts, this is camp number 3, I think. I think wealth is 3. No, wealth is 4, right? It's the fourth one. It's the least important. It's external. It's not who you are. Even physical strength, it's your physical body. It's a wonderful thing. It's part of you. Wealth is external. But so on one hand, there is a hierarchy. On the other hand, we say no. They say they're just as close. They're just as close to the temple. What is that telling you? That's telling you if each of these 4 values are here as an expression of and serving the anchor, then it's just as holy. If the purpose that I want to be healthy is so that I can serve God, then the health is just as important as the wisdom. If the purpose of the wealth is that I can go and do a mitzvah and perform good deeds in the world, then something that essentially is number 4 is just as close to God as everything else. So in other words, the question about these competing values is they're only competing if they're competing. But if there's an anchor in middle and each one expresses that same anchor, which is the temple, then first of all, one is not holier than the next. Once it's surrounded the temple, once it's for the purpose of the temple, or expressing what the temple expresses, which is the will of God, because the temple essentially is a house for the ark, which is a house for the Torah. And then they're just as holy and they're just as important. And essentially, they're not undermining each other because even when you're doing the more physical aspects, it's still for a spiritual purpose. So it's not a contradiction to the more spiritual sides of life. So in other words, there's no dichotomy. That dichotomy breaks down because it looks like I'm going in 4 directions and then multiply 4 by many, many more. But that's only externally. Internally, everything I do is an expression of that same desire to be the temple, to be a house for the temple, to be a house for God. And in that sense, it's in a way like this. It's almost like the census, where on one hand we have the overarching point, and the other hand have individual people and individual tribes and individual values, and both are true. This is the same thing. There are different competing values. I'm not just looking for wisdom. I'm not just looking for good character. I'm looking for success. I'm looking for health. So all good values. So, but they look like different values. But if you go deeper, they're not different values. It's all the same. It's all 4 sides of the temple. It's all surrounding the temple, and it's all for the purpose of the temple. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. They are all 4 very important categories, but the hierarchy also has its meaning, right? So without the wisdom, first for a reason, because without the wisdom you cannot organize, and then good character comes second, also for a reason, because without that you cannot navigate through life properly in the wilderness. Right?
Yeah, there is a hierarchy, but on one hand, you're going to say there's a hierarchy. On the other hand, everything is just as important. In other words, you're going to say what's more important, your brain or your hand? Of course, your brain is more important, right? So there is a hierarchy. On the other hand, pun intended, on the other hand, what we're saying here is the will of God is equally in all these places. You're not closer to the temple when you're studying Torah than when you're giving charity. Or when you're working, assuming you're working so that you should be able to give charity, and you're studying so that you should be able to study Torah when you have time on Shabbat. So yes, there's a hierarchy. There's higher, there's lower, no question about it. But the question is, are you closer to God when you're higher? Are you further from God when you're lower? The answer is no, provided your anchor is the temple. You're around the temple. You're living around the temple. The purpose is your temple. The orientation is the temple. If that's the case, then even the thing that is on the hierarchy lower, it's not as spiritual, it's more physical. You don't feel as close to God. It's not technically a mitzvah. It's what we call reshut. It's neutral. It's there's no obligation to do it. You're doing it because you have permission to do so. It's neutral. Essentially, there too, you're just as close. If it's around the temple. So that is something very powerful. That is around that's something very powerful. That is that's something very powerful. That is the on one hand there is a hierarchy, on the other hand there is no hierarchy. If right, because they could have traveled in a long line, they could have traveled linear. Put the ark first. I could see that they could say put the ark first, then Moses, then Aaron, then the Levites, then 12 tribes, right? That would be linear. That would be there's a place closer to the temple and further from the temple, and that would say you would right now have to organize not only which values are higher in the hierarchy, in the spiritual hierarchy, but where are you closer to God and where are you further from God? And when you put the temple in the center, you bust the model. You refuse to say, on one hand, you say there is a hierarchy. On the other hand, you say, no, I refuse to accept the notion that I'm farther from God when I'm pursuing a material success or physical health. And that's all physical needs. That's going to the God's going to the gym. It's also eating breakfast. But I'm not further from God, provided if this is I'm sitting around the camp. My breakfast is surrounding a tent of meeting. I'm serving a tent of meeting. Okay, this is big stuff. This is good stuff, I think. Okay, so let's talk about the flags for a second. There is this there is the Torah keeps saying ish al digloi, each one according to its flag. And we read 4 books of the Torah. I have not heard the word flag in the Torah up to this point, right? So something about flags pops up in this week's parsha, and we don't let go. It keeps talking about it. Let's see. Let's see. Second reading. No, I think it's in the fourth reading we start reading about the flags. Um, okay, for example, 52, chapter 1, verse 52, the Israelites must camp according to their tribal troops, each man by his tribe's division, and each man by his division's banner. Everyone has a banner. Flag is a banner. Degel is a flag. And from this point on, we're going to hear it again and again and again. Here, God spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, chapter 2, verse 2, the Israelites must camp each man by his banner, by the insignias, which is the signs, on the banners of their father's house. They must encamp around the tent of meeting at a distance. And then he talks about the camping in front on the east will be under the banner of the division of Judah. And keep saying the word banner and banner and banner, and it doesn't stop with the banner. So not only is each tribe, and each tribe has an individual banner, even though it doesn't say so explicitly, here it just says that the 3 tribes, each 3 tribes that create a camp, are comprised of a banner. But we know that every tribe had a banner. And the Torah just keeps talking about we have the banners and highlights the banners. So what's the spiritual significance of the banners? There's a beautiful medrash. There's a medrash in the Song of Songs that we talked about a few years ago. Song of Songs, I believe, chapter 7. So here the Medrash talks about how the nations of the world turn to the Jewish people and they say, "Follow us." In the story of the Song of Songs, basically, there's the young woman and her beloved. The man is disappeared. He's not here. Nobody knows where he went, and she's very loyal to him. And all the other girls are saying, why are you so into this guy? Why don't you find somebody else? Come to us. Come dance with us. Leave the guy alone. He's not here. And she basically says, I can't come dance with you because you can't take me to the dance party as good as he took me to. It's essentially what happens. And the Medrash says that they say, come, the nations of the world say, come to us, come to the Jewish people, come, why are you so loyal to God? Come to us, meaning convert, and we'll appoint you to be leaders of dukes, etc., the different categories of leadership. And the Jewish people say, look, what could you do for us? You can't do anything for us. You can't do for us what God did for us in the desert when he put us around the temple camps, the camps with the flags. That's what the Medrash says. And there's another Medrash that says that when the Jewish people, what flags, when they came and they saw at Sinai, they saw God, but they also saw all the angels. And the angels each has flags, because we know there are different camps of angels that we know. The Medrash says, no, there are flags. And the Jewish people say, we want those flags as well. Why? How come only the angels have flags? We want flags. And God says, you want flags? Okay, wait a little bit. We'll build a Mishkan, we'll build a tabernacle. Once we build the tabernacle, we'll be able to make flags, and then you can have your flags. So they wait the temple, they built the temple, now they have their flags. What is this issue with the flags? What does the flag represent? Obviously, it's not, obviously, there's something here. Question is, what is this? So there are obviously different interpretations, but I'm going to give you one Hasidic interpretation. And the idea is like this. What's a flag? What's the purpose of a flag? Flag, first of all, highlights who you are. What is your identity? What is your purpose? So if you're going to war and there's all different groups of soldiers and every soldier is supposed to do something else, how am I going to know what to do? How do I know who to follow? Right? So there's a guy on a horse with a flag. I follow him. I know what to do. So what is a banner? What does the flag represent? The flag represents, I see my flag, I know my purpose. Okay, beautiful. What if you had to imagine angels? What are angels? Angels are created. They're exactly with the way they're created. Either some love God, some are in awe of God. Each one has a certain quality that God creates them, and they're completely devoted to their mission. The flag is always in front of them because what is a flag? Or what flag is my purpose? It's synonymous with purpose. So the Jewish people are standing at Sinai and they say, we see angels. We want to be like those angels. We also want flags. We also want to be able to constantly have our purpose in front of us to know, even no matter how far we go out in the battlefield, we can always look back and see what our mission is, what our purpose is. And essentially, that's essentially what the Jewish people are telling the nations of the world. The nations of the world can say, come, why do you have to leave God? God left you, you were exiled. We can give you good things. We can give you power, we can give you leadership, we can give you might. And what do the people say? You can give us all those physical things. What you can't give us is purpose. And flags are purpose. And so essentially, when do we get that? Once we have the Mishkan, once we have a tabernacle. What does the tabernacle represent? Tabernacle represents you making a home for God in this world. So then we have the flags. What does the flag represent? Even when you're drifting away, even when you're going to battle, you remember your purpose. Meaning, even when you are involved in the material world, if you have a banner, you remember your purpose and you're not separate from your connection to God. So the angels it's easy for the angels to have a flag. The beautiful thing is that the Jewish people also receive the flags because we have a flag in a much more difficult situation. Flag means always be connected to your purpose. We can do so when we're in the desert, right? And this talks about this broader notion. Just to conclude here, and then we'll take the questions. We'll finish a little early today. The whole parsha is in some ways it's a paradox. Wilderness. Wilderness is the place of the opposite of order. There is no civilization. There's no order. There's no red lights. There's no green lights. There's no traffic. There's no rules. It's just wilderness. It's not hospitable to civilization. What do we do when we come to the wilderness? The first thing we do is we start creating order. This is going to be here. That's going to be there. You're going to sit there. We're creating order in the wilderness. Essentially, that's what we do in this world too. The world is physical. The physical reality is a world that is chaotic. You don't see the purpose, the inner purpose that's binding everybody. Everything seems to be just a conflict for survival. And what we're saying is, we're traveling through the desert. We're saying everything is part of a unified purpose. And we are creating that unity in the wilderness by bringing the temple. How does that happen? With the flag. What is the flag? No matter how far I go, I'm still connected to my mission and to my purpose. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. Beautiful ideas, and you answered my question as always before I even asked, but I just want to make sure. So we have like unified purpose because we all around the temple or
Yeah.
around the ark that represents unified, but we also have a flag which highlights the differences, and
Yes.
differences need to be aligned with the overall purpose. So
Yes.
that's the only way to travel, to organize in a desert, to face the difficulties, to understand your purpose, connect to that flag that represents your differences, but the
Yeah.
same aligned to the main
Yeah.
main.
In other words, what's my unique purpose? Flag, I would say, is unique purpose. Because if you want to say general purpose, we have the temple. But what's my unique purpose? And again, unique purpose, there's different levels. There's a unique purpose of my tribe, of the three tribes of my camp, then my tribe, then my family, then my individual, right? But the point is, the concept of a flag is it allows you to move away and still cling to that unity because there's a home to come back to. And there's also a visual of what my purpose is. So I know what I'm supposed to do. Without the flag, I'm drifting. With the flag, I'm not drifting.
Right. But out of curiosity, do we know what they look like?
The Medrash just says that there are different theories. There are different Medrashim about different colors. Some people say it was the colors of the so there's two things. There's the tribes, there's the flags of every individual tribe, and people say that was in a way the color of the stone that was on the priest's the choshen on the chest of the priest, right? So there's 12 tribes of the Israel. Each one has a specific stone. Those stones are named. So people think they may know what color those stones are. Maybe yeah, maybe no. It depends who you ask. So that's that. So some people say that is the tribe of the individual. That's the flag of the individual tribe. In addition, there's also the colors of the three tribes. Every three tribes has a flag. Now we could talk about that because Kabbalistically, there's this notion of you need an overarching purpose for different individuals to be able to unite. You need a greater, right? So the premise is if you have two opposites coming together, you have to have something greater than the individual two, right? The Medrash has a parable that there's a king, and the king has two ministers. One wants war, and one wants peace, right? Let's say you have the minister of war wants to destroy everybody, and then the diplomat wants to make peace with everybody. So they cannot talk to each other because they're so different. So they can't compromise and they can't talk to each other. But when they come before the king, in the presence of the king who's greater than both, now they can compromise. Now they can talk to each other. And the Torah talks about like this. The Medrash says about Oseh Shalom b'Ramav. God makes peace in the heavens, meaning the whole idea of nature is you have different components coming together. What binds together the different components of the atom, right? You need something greater than each of the components to bind it together. So the Medrash says there's the Michael, there's the minister of fire, minister of water. They're both in heaven. How does fire and water combine? How can you make peace between fire and water? Opposing elements within the spiritual realm, but also in the physical realm. And the answer is you have to have something greater. You have man and woman. How did man and woman come together? They're opposites. Naturally, they shouldn't be able to cleave. That's why we have a chuppah. We have overarching holiness. We have the presence of God, who's greater than man and woman. And with under the canopy of God, we could say, okay, we are components within something greater than ourselves. So that thing, when a person sort of submits, when this value submits to something greater than self, that's how you can have the unity. So we also have to have a flag that is greater than each individual three tribes, and then those three tribes can coexist. So that purpose sometimes is a purpose greater than self, right? So there's the banner. There's the banner of the individual tribe, which represents me. What is my value? And then there's the question is, what is the overarching value that's greater than me, right? In marriage, for example, we're building a family. Family is that we're building a marriage. Marriage is a collective. It's not me versus you or me and you. It's something, a third thing that's greater than both of us, right? So I have me, that's my flag, and then I have the flag of the camp. And that's the greater meaning.
Beautiful. Thank you. So the color also makes sense because it's not as concrete. It's not the image because we don't making images. The color is conceptual. Yeah, it's beautiful.
But it's unique. It's unique, right? Unique to each tribe. And then unique to each camp. So there's three more.
Beautiful. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful day, wonderful Shabbat. Thank you.